This is the regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee. We have a quorum, Mr. Smith, Mr. Koretz, myself, Bernard Parks as the chair. Colleagues, if we can get a concurrence on consent items 10, 11, 12, and 13, we can move those. Also understand on number 11, the Department of Finance has a corrected copy that the amount of money should be $500,000+ versus the $460 that was originally stated.
Is that just because
They
the law
did,
continues to...
well, they didn't add it correctly. It was 3 something and 129, and they came up with it.
Treasurer's office?
But yeah, and things that make you go But one of the things, just colleagues, that we will get from Department of Finance soon is on the number 11, when we show that we're paying $129,000 interest on their arrow, is a clear indication we need to change our current rules of paying interest when it is not an error of the city. So that's something that will come as a financial policy in the near future, but at this time we're working under their current policy. So if we can agree on the consent of 10, 11, 12, and 13 with a corrected copy on number 11, we can move those 4 items. Okay? We'll move that. We're going to go into closed session on items 1 through 5, and then when we get back with items 6, 7, 8, 9, if we can look at 6 and 7 together and also 8 and 9 together, we can address those two.
Do it.
Can't stay that long. We're there for about half an hour.
It's actually for item number 1. This is the case entitled Robert Stein versus City of Los Angeles. And then also item 5, the case entitled Niles Rhodes versus City of Los Angeles. We do have to make a open session a finding. These are the settlements for both cases are in the best interest of the city. There are no other sources of funds available to pay the settlement amount on a timely basis. The city also intends to make an interfund borrowing or advance from the reserve fund to pay the settlement on an interim basis, which loan or advance will be refunded or reimbursed with the proceeds of a JOB, judgment obligation bond.
Do we have to make that same finding at council also? Okay. So we'll move those items with those recommendations, and so we go to items 6 and 7.
Niles Rhodes and Robert Stein. Yeah, 1 and 5. Okay, that takes us to item number 6, which is the controller and city attorney, the city treasurer report relative to authorization to make temporary transfers between funds for meeting government obligations during the period prior to receipt of our property tax in December.
Good afternoon. I'm Bill Lamb from the Controller. The charter provides that the treasurer and the controller can request authority to borrow from other funds for cash flow purposes, providing that we return the money by before the end of the year. We are requesting authority to borrow $150 million between funds, in addition to the $400 million that we have already borrowed through the tax and revenue anticipation notes. At this point, last payday, we borrowed $20 million from the reserve fund for cash flow purposes, and dropping the reserve fund to $138 million. We anticipate borrowing another $80 million from the reserve fund next payday, dropping the reserve fund to approximately $58 million. With the interfund borrowing, we will repay the $100 million from the reserve fund. We will return the interfund borrowing later in this year when we get our property tax money. We expect to have to borrow the full $150 million on interfund borrowing, plus borrowing approximately $50 million from the reserve fund during December. The reason for the change is we had anticipated receiving $60 million in special parking revenue fund money this year's budget. In discussions with the CAO, it looks like the sale of Mangrove is not going to occur this year, and that the rest of the declaration of surplus in the special parking revenue fund is not going to occur until later this year, which has increased our need for short-term cash flow borrowing.
Okay. Let me ask on item 6, on dealing with the borrowing against our property tax. From your report's a little dated October 21st. Have we now gotten a firm date that that process is in place, that we can begin to borrow on our property tax that the state has retained?
The CAO has been dealing with that one. We have not.
It's basically our understanding that they will reduce our December payment, and that we will get half of the amount in January, mid-January. I don't know the exact date, but I believe it's around the 14th, 15th.
When we say half the amount, is that us doing the bonding against what they've taken?
Basically, the council has already approved going through that securitization program. So they're going to take 50% in December, which then we'll get that 50% back in January. And then the second 50%, remaining 50%, we will not get that in April, but then we'll get repaid that amount in May.
Okay. So it's December and May. Okay. Yes, we can make sure that the committee report reflects that, just to update the paragraph that's in the controller's report. And then, are we still, as it relates to the controller, evaluating on this overage of $10 million per pay period, or is that lessened at all?
Last pay period, it was $8.3 million.
All right, so it's a
So
little bit less.
it has been trending down. We're waiting to see what the impact is of the coalition, also the impact of future retirements, of the overtime on civilian units and the overtime on sworn, as well as the deferral of sick time payouts in January for sworn and for coalition.
And then the one thing I was not aware of until I read the report, does the controller have the ability to borrow borrow within the emergency reserve fund without a council action?
Yes, the charter does not divide the fund, the reserve fund, into contingency and emergency. So the charter gives the controller the authority to borrow from the reserve fund. The contingency and the reserve are policies of the city as opposed to the charter.
Okay. Let me ask, Ray, is that the only usage of the money that would not require council action?
I believe so. I'm not aware of anything else.
Okay. Okay. And then as far as item 7, the sense of the reserve fund loans,
Chairman Parks? Actually, just one other note, just as the controller mentioned borrowing from the reserve fund and that balance being drawn down to, I believe, $58 million. With all of the litigation and the settlements that have been discussed, there's actually one more that hasn't been brought before your committee yet, but with that, we're looking at borrowing close to $25 million from the reserve fund basically in the next couple of months. So it's going to further constrain and bring that balance down a little bit.
but now, is that prior to us going to get the JOB?
Yes, yes.
So then we could be down, what, in the 20s?
We could be getting down 30 or so.
We are hoping that the committee and the council approve our request for interfund borrowing, not this week, but next week, and that we then replace the money borrowed from the reserve fund. But going forward, we are concerned that having a reserve fund gives us a flexibility that we would not have if the reserve fund was drawn down.
Okay. And let me ask you, when do we intend to bring the special parking revenue back to the committee?
I will follow up. I believe we have a report on $39 million. I don't know if it's pending before committee or not, but I'll follow up on where that is.
All right. And then on the reserve fund loans, when we look at the categories, I guess, the loans repaid, I guess the second and third box, what is our perception that those would be paid back before June 30th? Do we have a sense of that, the loans repaid upon receipt, and then the loans repaid upon receipts from other governmental agencies? Do we have a sense of how much of that, 42 point something million will be paid before June 30th?
Well, the largest chunk is the 19.5, which is the surplus from last year's special parking revenue fund. As soon as the council acts on that or makes a decision as to what's going to happen, then with that transfer to the reserve fund, that will liquidate that 19.6 million.
Okay.
The 18 and the 2 under the Charter Section 261, that is, a lot of that is advances or where the city has done the work. We've made the payment, and it's either an inter-fund where one department is looking at the invoices, preparing, or to federal or state agencies where the reimbursement is from sources outside of the city. And we in the CAO try to push the departments to do that as quickly as possible.
Okay, is that a responsibility of the departments, or does the CAO get actively involved in that?
We do usually send correspondence to departments. I mean, we get the information from the controller. We work with them on trying to get departments to repay loans as quickly as possible as funds are available. So.
But we don't have a sense right now whether that money will come in under that 18.5 million and the 2.1 million prior to June 30th.
No. We have already received about 2.2 million against those since the end of September. But the rest during the course of the year, we don't have a sense at this point.
Okay. All right. And then let me ask Ray, when we use the term write-off, do we have an ability, in order to protect the reserve fund just a little bit, that on those write-offs, if issues, whether that should be charged against the subsequent year budget?
You know, we can sort of have policy discussion on whether we want to write those off now or whether we'll charge them in subsequent years to the department as suggested. Most of the time, if it is a general fund problem that we've had this year, it just makes it that more difficult, for next year for those departments. And certainly as we go forward and we look at what's out there, there's not a whole lot of hope that departments will have extra money. I think a classic example is El Pueblo that's being held now. It's 400 and maybe, I think it's 18,000 exactly, but we made them book that loan a couple years back, but we've been carrying that for 3-4 years, and they really don't have the ability at this point to repay that unless they have an infusion of revenue in the coming years.
Because the one thing, we've talked about this before, it's a matter of whether the reserve fund drops and keeps dropping, or departments end up with less in their general fund budget. And the thing to write it off, particularly if it is an operational issue within the department, it's one thing if they didn't get a reimbursement back that they were expecting, but if it's merely from us covering their overages and then them not fulfilling their responsibility to stay in budget, it would appear that we should roll those into the subsequent year as opposed to just taking it out of the reserve fund, which can't afford it either.
Yeah, on that vein, most of them, they're simple, small amounts of money on these write-offs, and there are little discrepancies in bills, et cetera. There's 3 that caught my attention that account for $370,000 to building safety ITA. It's on attachment 2, the 261 write-offs to building and safety, 1 of 8. And all 3 of them say they were ineligible expenses. Were those to be charged to the enterprise fund, or how did they become ineligible, and why didn't we know this up front?
A lot of times, and Sally probably has a better feel for this, but a lot of times departments will bill, and the department that is the paying department will determine that the expense was not eligible.
So ITA billed building and safety for something, and then building safety said, we're not going to pay that? Or-
Yes. Building and Safety said that it's not eligible, there's a contention on the billing between ITA and
Who ordered the work then? Building and safety, right?
Building and Safety.
And then they refused to pay the bill?
Yes.
What gives them the right to do that?
Because they feel that it's not eligible. They didn't render the service, or sometimes they said that they overcharged them. So they're working on it. There was an instance when the Building and Safety said that they already paid them, but the ITA said they haven't received the
Well,
payment.
why would it have been a loan then?
Because
I understand if there's a billing discrepancy, but when you borrow the money and then say you're not going to pay it back because you've determined it's not eligible,
Well, what happens is at the end of the fiscal year, if it's outstanding, we have to borrow from the reserve fund to make the payment because the payment is out the door. And so then the departments have to resolve it. If the departments can't resolve it, then they have to come into the Budget and Finance Committee and the council to seek write-off of the loan.
yeah, I think this goes to what Mr. Parks was getting to, is that maybe in these kind of situations, then the department should pick up the bill. So we shouldn't go to the general fund to pay a discrepancy between two departments on how much one charges the other. That should be their responsibility if they made the mistake up front thinking they could get away with it or something. Somebody's got to, one of those two agencies got to pay for it. It shouldn't be back on the general fund's back, particularly almost $400,000.
And I think that's what's happened. We've closed down their books at the end of the year, and then they forget about it for the next 3 years, and then we write it off. And it seems as though there's got to be a way to mediate that, and if they didn't get the service, then the bill should be mitigated. And they certainly shouldn't have a double payment, I mean, within our system. But the thing is that the general fund is getting whacked twice.
And we, both the controller and the CAO, try to push the departments to resolve the issues so that they do get the payment, but sometimes the departments, the special purpose funds, have certain limitations on what can be paid for.
But those departments know that, and that's the point. When you see an amount this big,
Right.
you go, wait a minute. If it was $5,000, normally we'd just not even ask the question. But in these times, $5,000 even becomes a big amount. But I think the departments are getting away with murder here because they know they can fight all they want, and sooner or later, we have to just say, okay, forget it. But that's not the right way to do business. And these departments know they can get away with it. That's the problem. I think we need more fiscal constraints, and, one way or the other, one of you is going to pay, and if you can't figure it out, let us figure out which ones you can pay. And then you'll find a lot of people not making these kind of mistakes.
Well, and I think over the years, we have made great strides in, it used to be that we would have stuff that was 20 years old. And we have been aggressively cleaning it up and aggressively, so that you see a lot less of that in here. And the departments are paying more attention to it, I think, because of the concern. Frankly, one of the greatest tools that we have is when we put this together is that, say, give us your best response, because you may be the ones before the Budget and Finance Committee explaining what the circumstances are.
Yeah, but explaining is not hard enough. I think if they knew that as a dispute resolution, that this committee is going to pick a winner, you might find people not making those kind of mistakes. And we need to look at it as a part of our fiscal policy, I think, and saying that anything over $50,000 or whatever, that this committee will determine which department pays it. But it's not going to go to the general fund in the future.
Yeah. One of the things probably in this case, and I don't recall the circumstance, but it definitely speaks to having some good service level agreements between departments. I know there were some issues between building safety and ITA regarding some of the services that ITA was paying, and I suspect that is that case.
Yeah.
And so some of these service levels agreement need to be tightened up, and if there is disputes, then they need to come back here.
We'll look into that then. 'Cause I can understand if they said ITA didn't do a very good job, I'd probably side with building and safety, because I would agree. But for the time being, that's not the rule, so.
No, I agree with what Mr. Smith said.
Yeah, I think you already hit it on the head.
All right. If we move item 6 with the clarifying language from the CAO regarding the eligibility of the city's return on their property tax, we can add that. On 7, we will, on the reserve fund, we'll ask the CAO to look into this issue of this $50,000 issue that Mr. Smith brought up. It's through mediating between departments. We'd also ask, I guess we can request the mayor's office to move forward and get, request those departments that have items that are in the loans to be repaid upon receipt of revenue, or loans that are receipt of revenue from other governmental agencies, to put a renewed emphasis on retrieving those funds before June 30th, 2010. And then, let's see, I think that will cover it. And then that we also ask the CAO to look into loans that would impact the general fund or reserve fund be charged against the subsequent department's budget as opposed to the reserve fund. So we move those, item 7 with those directions. Thank you.
Okay, that takes us to item number 8, and actually item number 9 as well. And those are city treasurer reports relative to the investment and cash management report.
On, we could ask, be that we have 4 of these reports, we'll receive and file May, June, and July, and ask for presentation on item 9 for the month of August. And so you can give us the most updated information as it relates to our investment and cash management report.
Good afternoon, Joya DeFore, City Treasurer. To the finances first, we will, we're looking and scrubbing numbers. We'll come back and give you and report on a general fund number. As we hear the money going out and out of the general fund, that directly impacts how much interest we can earn. So with some of the information we heard today and the timing of receipts, we'll be at our next report back reporting on a revised interest number. Unfortunately, just from what I heard, it's going to be lower. If it's going out the door, we won't have that available to invest. Then just some other news. We've been challenged in this economic environment to try to do things differently and better. One thing we did try, but we weren't successful, we applied and proposed to manage part of DWP's retirement plan, the cash plan, much like we're managing now. We were told we didn't make the finals. I find it interesting we didn't make the finals, but I just wanted you to know, I think the message we'd like to send is that we are looking to leverage what we do well and see if we can keep money within the city rather than paying outside the city. We finally did get our trademark and copyright application filed for the software that we developed in-house, and we're commencing marketing efforts on that. Long story short, this is software that receives banking information and then parses it or divides the information and shoots it to the appropriate place and automatically pushes that information to the controller's general fund. We have had some tentative interest from the Government Finance Officers Association. They often go into joint marketing agreements with some of the members, and we're just at the beginning stages of that discussion. And then on to Moody's Investment Services, and this is pretty much a closed issue now, but as you may recall, in early June, we came to you and said we had made the decision to forego the Moody's AAA rating, which it seems very unusual. And we informed Moody's as such. fast forward to September when Moody's said, "Oh, give us some updated information." We said, "No, we don't want the rating." They said, "Well, then we don't think the rating you had in May was AAA," and so subsequently they downgraded us and then withdrew the rating. On the surface, that may, in isolation, that may seem, like a horrible thing. I was just at a meeting in Washington, D.C. with a lot of private sector folks, and they really are experiencing the same thing. In fact, I was at a meeting where we were on the Hill talking to the SEC about some rating agency reform. We benefit because this rating did not impact our debt rating. It was purely discretionary, and all of our investors were internal to the city. So it was sort of, it was a nice to have, it was wonderful to have, but we would not compromise the way we did business and the way we invested to conform to the way Moody's wanted us to invest. And just sort of to bring that point home, Lehman Brothers had an investment-grade Moody's rating the day before they went bankrupt. So I don't trust anyone who's going to tell me, in that situation, how we should invest money. Well, you probably noticed these things standing in front of us. Very pleased to report to you on actually 3 awards, 2 from the same, all from private sector organizations, and the project manager is Krista Binder, who was the one who really did a lot of the heavy lifting for these awards, but I will describe them, then I'll let her tell you on what basis we won. This big one here is the grand prize winner of the Association for Financial Professionals Pinnacle Award, and the other finalists were Microsoft and General Electric. This is the category win. We won the strategy category, Treasury as a strategic partner, beating out REI and Nike. And then on the end, it's our bronze award for the Treasury and Risk Cash Management category of Alexander Hamilton. And if you'll bear with me for a couple of minutes, I would like Krista to tell you what we did, and we would really like to make a formal presentation. With this win, we also won $10,000, and we designated Angel's Flight as the charity. We would like to do that presentation, if we could, with Angel's Flight at City Council.
Sure. Yeah. Great.
Just in a nutshell,
Your name for the record.
Krista Binder, Assistant Treasurer. What we did through the banking conversion project was really take the city sort of 30 years forward in the way we process financial transactions. We created what we call a virtual city and a virtual bank, which is sort of a online, state-of-the-art, at your fingertips financial processing framework for the city. We also took our existing bank account structure, which was absolutely not ideal and prone to lots of risk, and centralize it with a lot of ancillary shadow accounts for reconciliation. So now we have this really robust reporting system, so everybody knows where their money is, where it's receipted. This has saved a ton of money and time as far as manual processing. We also automated general ledger posting through the system that we created in this new structure. We also implemented a lot of best practices in banking, which the city had never done before, which most everybody does. So we're now kind of with everybody else. One of those would be Positive Pay, which is a basic fraud protection tool, which lets you know if somebody's taken your check and tries to cash it with a different name.
Name of it?
It's called Positive Pay. It's been around for many years.
20 years at least.
Yeah. But there's many more things that we did. We gave 2 presentations. I just came back from New York City, where we won that award from Treasury and Risk Magazine. But at AFP, we gave a quite detailed presentation on what we did. So we would love to have the opportunity to share that with you.
Could you give some of the metrics on
Oh,
how you
sure,
judge
sure.
success? Because I think everyone wants to hear the dollars and cents.
These are just a few. For example, in Treasury alone, on a month basis, we used to have about 1,220 unidentified deposits. And that means it takes a lot of staff time to figure out who belongs to what. Now we have less than 20. That saved about 107 hours a week processing time in Treasury. We eliminated paper. Everybody was getting paper statements and paper this and that, and we said no. So that saved about $219,000 in just no paper. That was an easy one. We eliminated people coming to Treasury with their checks, just manual time. We haven't quantified yet the savings to the departments. This is all Treasury
They would
stuff.
just bring their check to cash?
Yeah, they would also send them through interoffice mail, which we found quite amusing. Not a best practice. So we eliminated that as well. A nice one for many of you who travel at the airport, we implemented what's called virtual merchant. These are wireless credit card terminals at all the parking lots, and the city of LA has a lot of parking lots. Before, this was a dial-up process, so if you were at LAX and you're in the parking lane, the attendant would actually have to go from your booth, run over to take your credit card, run over 4 lanes of traffic, swipe it in the machine, wait a little bit longer, a couple more minutes. Then run across back 4 lanes of traffic, give it to you, and you would sign it. Now we have terminals at every booth. It takes seconds. That's saved about 400 hours per day in processing time for the airport. So, what we've done is it's citywide. It includes all the city departments. And one of the really fun things for us in Treasury is the departments have really learned a lot about banking and best practices, and now they're really motivated to take on new stuff. So that's been kind of the snowball effect that we like to see in Treasury.
Well, I was wondering also, when we recently changed our bank, has that pushed this process faster?
Well, that's why we had to do the process. And what we actually did, because some people, they've seen that dollar amount for banks and oh my goodness, it was much, much worse. And just a little bit of background on that. Before we did one conversion, we took 6 months and reviewed every single city department in 3 different levels. Some were we called it the deep dive, where we actually had outside consultant working with the bank come in and assess the business processes that were used in the systems, and then actually implemented what they needed to support their business. We had the other end, they were mainly done by questionnaire, and then we had the departments in the middle. So rather than just implement or convert what was there before, which wasn't a best practice, we actually did an analysis and then worked with the departments to implement what they needed. And that's why it went fairly smoothly. A couple of hiccups, yes, but it's so much better than where we were before. I guess my concern going forward, especially in this time where we really need to be much more aggressive in adopting best practices, there are some practices in the city, again, that have been around for 20 years, but because we really don't hire people from the outside who would be familiar with the best practice, we're not in the city really trained to keep up with best practices. Some of the things that we recommend are seen as, oh my goodness, something really different and something really dangerous, when in fact we're probably 10 to 15 years behind doing what is now not in the real world, not even a best practice, it's just a common practice. And so those kind of things, we'll do our best to work within the city family, but at some point it's costing us so much money, we may have to come to this group and start advocating some of those improvements.
Well, I think from my perspective, if we could start getting, and the reason that we ask you to come here routinely is to keep us updated on what's going on, and we bring you before council so they're aware of the other part of, there's a part of creating revenue as well as spending revenue. But if you have a list of things that you think that the city should be implementing, we certainly like to get that, bring it through committee and get them approved and also moving forward on them, because anything that we can streamline and save money or find a way to do it better and save personnel costs, we certainly are interested in doing that.
No questions, just congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations. Great. Thank you.
Very exciting stuff.
Let me ask you, when would we schedule this for council?
Anytime after next Tuesday.
Okay, so we can get some coordination, and when you bring this to council, we can get the presentations for the awards, and also you can make your award to the nonprofit. Okay, so we'll get that scheduled. And so thank you very much, and congratulations on your award.
Thank you, and thank you for your support.
When you come to council, with all what you heard today about reserve fund and stuff, we may have some more updated figures you can share to us that would be attached to the August report.
Okay.
Most updated. Thank you.
We are the champions.
Anything else?
That's it.
No public comment, we're adjourned.